I have a very simple message to share with you. We need better ways to build software in remote and distributed teams. Now, that's an odd claim without context, so let me break it down into three things I must tell you about. Let's get into the first thing. The war for talent. Do you recognize this ad? The logo on the top right should give you a hint. Well, that logo belongs to Bharat Pay, one of India's unicorns. In 2021, they were so desperate to attract talent that this was their hiring pitch. Join and get a superbike. Guess what? That wasn't all. New hires would also get to watch the Indian Premier League cricket matches in the UAE. Sounds like an offer from another world, right? I'm producing this video during talks of layoffs and a recession, so you may think that those days of scrambling for talent are behind us. But here's the funny thing. The war for talent has repeated itself every few years. In 2014, India's first unicorn was doing exactly what Bharat Pay was doing in 2021. They were giving out superbikes and cars. One could have thought this was a temporary scramble, except it never is. Tech talent is scarce, and the war for talent will continue. So it makes sense to listen to what our talent pool is telling us. I've been surveying technologists and getting their pulse about work preferences since 2020. Here's what I've learned. First, let's examine flexibility as a theme. 45% of technologists want to work remotely all the time. This number is changing rapidly upwards, recession or not, whether employers are remote friendly or not. Let's make more sense of that number. 80% of technologists want to work remotely for 3 days or more each week. That should tell us that most people want to work remotely most of the time. Add to this the fact that less than 2% technologists are happy to work beyond their regular daylight hours. So the message about flexibility is loud and clear. People want to work remotely and they don't want to work long or late hours. Now, this is a good thing because we all want diverse, inclusive teams, and remote work has an impact on that. You see, 50% of parents want to work remotely all the time. And when you filter down to women, 92% of women parents wish to work remotely for 3 days or more each week. Gender is not the only dimension of diversity. If you look at another historically underrepresented group, 67% of people with disabilities wish to work remotely all the time. This is staggering. It tells us that if we want a flexible, diverse workplace, remote work holds one of the big keys. And until this point, that's all good news, right? Let's get to the bad news. That's about job satisfaction. Inefficient collaboration across opposing time zones leads to dissatisfaction amongst talent. The more senior you are, the poorer your net promoter score on these teams, which means that your most tenured people don't recommend working on such teams. Not a good place to be. When you work odd hours, only 11% of people actually think of themselves as being productive. And coming back to diversity, teams that work long hours, straddling opposing time zones, are 28% less diverse than other teams. That doesn't lead to a healthy work environment, does it? Now, if I had to summarize those themes, it's evident that if we want to attract and retain the right talent, and if we want to build diverse teams, we need to do remote work much better. This can be a big differentiator. And that's the first thing I wanted to talk to you about today. Let's move to the second thing. The second thing affects anyone who delivers software. You'll recognize many of the challenges I mentioned. The first issue is meeting overload, and my research data is painful when it comes to this aspect of work. We spend 35% of our time in meetings, on average. We report 1/3 of these meetings to be a waste of time. Now, I work for a services firm, so we are good at putting a cost on people's time. You can peg the loss in productivity per person at $12,833. Let me explain that number if dollars don't always make sense. If we had that cash in India, each of us could buy a new car with it. and upgrade it each year. That would be highly irresponsible, but I just want to make a point about how much money that is. For a company of 1,000 technologists, that's $13 million of lost hours. Crazy, right? The reason we don't pay attention to it too much is because this is a hidden cost. Someone is paying this cost, just not evidently. Now, this has an impact on our effectiveness at work. There are many factors that impact our effectiveness, but there are two that are relevant to our conversation. One, our ability to do deep work. That's when we get stuck into a problem and work without interruptions. And two, getting into a state of flow when we do it, which is when we are so into our work that we could go on and on with it. Time just flies. I asked my industry colleagues how much deep work they wish for each week. And most people are realistic. We have 40-hour work weeks, but they wish on average that they could get just 20 hours of deep work each week. Any guesses how much they actually get? 11 hours. That's a 45% deficit on what's already a modest goal. You know why? Because on average, we all face 18 interruptions each day. From what? You know it. Meetings and instant messaging. The people I researched reported these as the top two culprits. This overdependence on meetings also comes from a misunderstanding of agile software development. Let's go and examine where it all started. The Agile Manifesto. It's a wonderful document, but you see, when a document is as broadly written, it's prone to misinterpretation. For example, let's dive into one of the principles. It says, the most efficient and effective way of conveying information in a team is face-to-face conversation. Okay. So the way many of us interpret this is that on agile teams, everything is a conversation. This works for a two-person team. That's just one line of communication, right? But the moment you go to 3 people, one line goes to 3 lines. 4 people, 6 lines. 5 people, 10 lines. 6 people, 15 lines. You get the drift, right? Verbal communication becomes complex and unmanageable with team size. A 14-person team has 91 lines of paired communication. This approach to tribal communication and knowledge sharing does not scale. On distributed teams, team knowledge takes many forms. We need new disciplines in place to bring these artifacts into our daily ways of working. The Agile Manifesto should still inspire us, but we must interpret it in our current context. The broad point I'm making is that for distributed teams, synchronous delivery is not just unsustainable, but it's also hard to scale. And that's the second thing I wanted to talk to you about today. Which brings me to the last thing I want to tell you about, the future of work. If you listen to your people and you want to run a resilient team, you must embrace 2 characteristics. Number 1, location independence. This means that your delivery model should hold strong regardless of where you execute it from, home, office, or a third place. And second, you must be more asynchronous. Fewer meetings, stronger documentation, calmer teams. Both these characteristics will help us reimagine distributed agile. Let's look at a very broad example. This is the standard Scrum timeline. Let's ask some questions about the standard Scrum ceremonies. Number 1, the daily stand-up. Do you really need to meet every day to discuss what you did yesterday and what you will do today? This information should be available in real time. There's enough tooling and automation for this. Do you really need to meet for 4 hours each sprint for planning? A prioritized backlog from which developers pick the next ready item is much simpler. Forget about velocity tracking and focus on throughput and cycle time instead. Every sprint does not need a review. Sometimes we don't build something that deserves a demo. You can summarize almost every sprint in a short wiki page with videos of new functionality where necessary. Reserve full-blown demos and review meetings for the big showcases. Retros shouldn't be an event anymore, they're a process. The brainstorm can happen asynchronously using a Google form or an online whiteboard. Use the meeting only to act on the information and to plan improvements. Working this way has tremendous benefits. I have 6 big ones. Number 1, people have work-life balance. They choose when to work and where they have to work from. They fit their work into their life and not the other way around. Number 2, you optimize for scale. Everyone can't be in every meeting, and you need to share information across the team. Writing allows you to do so regardless of team size. Not only is it referenceable for the future, it's also faster to consume. Number 3, people have time for deep work. Well, if you don't have so many meetings in the day, the entire day is yours for creative work. Number 4, your teams can be more diverse. Not only can you hire from anywhere, you can also include people who are non-native English speakers. Moreover, you can include people with disabilities and people who are neurodiverse who don't do very well around other people. You can include women, even if they have a disproportionate share of household responsibilities, by just allowing them to work at a time that suits them. Number 5, when you're working asynchronously, there'll be many times you'll have to make a decision by yourself, and that's what we call defaulting to action. Sometimes you'll be wrong, but it's okay to backtrack and adapt. The advantage? Your colleagues spend less time being blocked and more time getting things done. And last but not the least, you lay the building blocks for a knowledge-sharing culture because you write and you curate. It helps with onboarding, it helps with knowledge sharing, and it reduces the fear of missing out. Okay, now you may ask yourself, who in the world works this way? Let me tell you, you're in good company. Open source projects have been working asynchronously without meetings for 30 odd years or more. Most enterprise projects aren't a patch on them when it comes to quality. The asynchronous work movement is also mainstream now. These are some of the pioneers and early adopters, and the movement is gaining traction every month. My company, ThoughtWorks, has also recommended this approach on our tech radar. This is where you'll find my website, async-agile.org, handy. On this site, you'll find techniques to move away from a meeting-centric culture when implementing just about any agile practice. Use it to adapt your practices to a remote, distributed setup and to embrace an async-first mindset. To watch this space, follow me on LinkedIn. I have a book scheduled to be out in 2023. And that was the last thing I wanted to talk to you about today. So to conclude, being async first is about attracting talent, organizing your people in high-performing teams, and creating companies that embrace a bold new future of work. Now, isn't that something we can all get behind?